Fallout from the deadly coronavirus continues to affect global markets. The Hang Seng reopened today at the same time that Hong Kong announced it would limit travel from mainland China. The number of known cases of the virus increased by nearly 60% overnight, with more than 4,500 cases reported and over 100 dead. Joining us now is today's panel, Yahoo Finance's Jared Blickery and Kathy Jones, Schwab Center for Financial Research Chief Fixed Income Strategist. They're still with us. And with more on the impact of the virus on markets is James Hardiman. He's Wedbush Securities Managing Director of Equity Research. James, thank you for being here. You focus on travel companies in particular, so obviously there are big implications there for those folks. Let's start with the cruise lines, because we're about to get earnings from the likes of Royal Cruises and some of the others. How long before this really starts to have more of a significant effect?
Well, I think with every passing day, it is becoming is creating a materially negative impact on the earnings at some of these cruise companies. So as of, I believe it was either Friday or Saturday, these guys started canceling cruises. Royal Caribbean, who hasn't announced a date yet, but presumably are going to need to report earnings next week. They have one ship in the region right now, Spectrum of the Seas. By our math, every lost voyage is $3 to $4 million of revenue and about 2 cents of earnings. They've announced thus far 2 cancellations of that ship. So, these numbers add up pretty quickly. The hope is obviously by the time they report next week that we've seen some stabilization in all of the up and to the right trends we've seen with respect to coronavirus. But in the absence of that, I think they're going to have to be extra conservative in terms of how they guide 2020.
I want to read a statement that we got from Johnson & Johnson, the giant pharmaceutical company. They're working on potential vaccines to prevent this, and they said, quote, "We will utilize the same technology that was used in the development and manufacture of Johnson & Johnson's Ebola vaccine, which is currently deployed in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. The same technology also was used to construct our Zika and HIV vaccine candidates." So when you get news of this kind of thing, I realize it'll be weeks, months. I don't know how long it would take to bring that kind of vaccine to market. But the industries that are reliant on stopping this virus so that they can grow, they've got to look at that as, okay, there's a sign of stability, but how long can they wait?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's they can't wait that long. I can tell you that. I mean, I think the hope prior to a remedy is that the officials, the medical professionals can at least slow the spread. I saw one statistic where, on average, the people that study this believe that every person passes it on to 2.5 other people. And that number is way too high. It seems like every 2 days we see a doubling of both the people that have contracted the virus and the people that have died from the virus. And so, again, while you're seeing exponential growth, I feel comfortable in saying that 6 months from now, we'll be thinking about this in the past tense, and from an investor perspective, people will actually look to early 21 as an opportunity, as an easy comp, so to speak. But until we see some stabilization in those numbers, it's hard to have that confidence that we have in fact bottomed from a valuation perspective.
Hey, James, Jared Blickery here. I want to ask you about the airlines, because most of them have been under pressure. Maybe Delta is the exception, at least looking at their stock performance over the last year. What do you see? What's the fallout for the airlines, and how is this impacting them? And what about the tailwind, perhaps, of at least lower fuel prices because of crashing crude oil prices?
Yeah, it's a good question. And to clarify, I don't officially cover the airlines. Having said that, we have done considerable survey work. Literally over the weekend, we put together an impromptu survey of about 400 potential travelers to try to get an idea. I think everybody gets that travel in and around China is going to be significantly impacted. But my bigger concern would be the notion that even Western travelers would look at what's going on and curtail their travel. And as we found out, that does appear to be the case. Unsurprisingly, about half of people that we talked to didn't think that this was going to impact their travel at all. Another third said that they would avoid travel in and around China, but that left about 20% of the respondents saying we're nervous about all types of travel, whether it's air, cruise, train, or just overall. And it doesn't take a significant portion of that 20% to actually cancel or just to defer their travel for that to ultimately impact travel stocks, travel names, travel companies of all kinds. So again, I think the impact is going to be widespread. I do believe, yet again, a year from now we're going to look back upon this, and at some point there's going to be a buying opportunity. But as we sit here in the midst of it, it's hard to say when and where that is exactly.
James, this is Kathy Jones. Just a quick question. When we look at this, we compare it to the SARS virus back in 2003. Mm-hmm. And if you remember at the time, it sort of crested and then came down. Is that the expectation that you have now, that stocks started to rebound just as it seemed as if the number of people infected was peaking? Is that sort of the expectation you're working with now?
That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think SARS is a good barometer. At least it's the best barometer that we have. I hear a lot of people comparing this to Zika from a couple of years ago. I don't think that's a great comparison. I guess the only challenge with SARS from a stock perspective is the idea that back then, early 2000s, most of these companies, whether it's the cruise names or the online travel names that we follow, neither of them had anywhere near the exposure that they have today with respect to China and broader Asia. So, obviously the impacts on mainland China were severe when it came to SARS, and we're seeing that again today. But the impact on these stocks is far greater today than it was back then. Having said all of that, by all accounts, we did see, major negative impacts on the travel industry within China surrounding SARS, but then it did bounce back fairly quickly thereafter, and I think that's the general assumption that people are working with. Obviously, I'm not a viral expert, and so I don't want to assume that the virus is going to be similar to what it was back then. The good news is I think you've got the smartest people working on the problem. Yeah. I think back then it was largely Chinese officials. Today, the World Health Organization, the CDC, everybody is chipping in to try to get an answer here.
Yeah, James Hardiman, thank you so much from Wedbush Securities. And I have to get in a gratuitous Cleveland reference. That's where you are, since it's not Adam next.
I recognized Key Tower and Terminal Tower behind you, and I have a soft spot in
exactly.
my heart for Cleveland.
Thanks,
say hi to the
James.
North Coast.